this is Dan Ferrisi, Editor-in-Chief with Commercial Integrator, welcoming you to AV Plus, the podcast for the commercial AV integration industry. I'm really happy to be continuing our series of 40 Influencers Under 40 podcasts, and we have 4 more with us today. We're joined by Eric Jingst, who is Enterprise Architect with AVI Systems, Annie Foster, who is Associate Director of Classroom Technologies with Washington and Lee University, Kate Adkins, who is UX Engineering Manager with Root Integrated Systems, and Kaylie Shaffer, who is Senior Manager of Public Relations with Crestron Electronics. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. Thank you for joining us, as always, on the AV Plus podcast.
As always, please like and subscribe to our YouTube page, and please subscribe to the AV Plus podcast on Apple and on Spotify.
I'm really excited to be continuing this series of 40 Under 40 themed AV Plus podcasts. We have another group of 4 40 Under 40 honorees here with me today, and we want to get into all of their backgrounds, their insights, their wisdom, and their advice for the commercial AV industry about how to hang on to and cultivate talent like themselves. So I want to thank you, Eric, thank you, Annie, thank you, Kate, and thank you, Kaylie, for being here today. I really appreciate your involvement in the AV Plus podcast, and congratulations on being honored as part of the 40 Under 40.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, as we've done with this entire series so far, I want to talk to each of you in turn and get a little bit of biographical information to start, and then we'll move more into the open forum discussion. Why don't we start with you, Kate? I know you are UX Engineering Manager with Root Integrated Systems. Can you share a little bit about your career journey, what brought you to the role you're currently in, and what continues to ignite your passion and keep you motivated to be a successful member of the commercial AV industry, as clearly you are with this honor?
Sure. So I've kind of always loved how audio and video can be used to create experiences, like even from high school. And I actually went to college to be a video production major. Ended up getting a job right outside of college at a local community college, and was doing some broadcast stuff. Our studio was being renovated one summer, so the AV team kind of grabbed me and was like, "Hey, we need bodies to help install all these classrooms." There were like 14 classrooms to install over the summer. So that was my first introduction to AV, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. It's where I learned about programming, kind of got introduced to that, and just kind of figured out, how we can basically make magic happen is kind of how I like to say. When you hit that button and all of a sudden the room comes alive around you. So that's kind of one of my favorite things. I moved on from that. I was a service tech for about 7 years for a local integrator. And then when the opportunity opened up at Root to become a full-time programmer, I just jumped on it. So I've been doing that for about 3 years, and just fairly recently was promoted to manager of the department. So we're kind of taking more of a user-centered approach to our programming and kind of developing that user experience. So that's kind of where my passion is. It's just making that magic happen in the room.
Well, congratulations on that recent promotion. And I think that's really a good way to frame things as well. I mean, there is a lot of magic under the hood of what we do, the experiences we create, the memories that we can instill in people. I think there is something magical about it. And I think calling it by that name is actually it's a nice and refreshing thing to think about it that way. So let's move on to you next, Eric. Eric Jingst, who is Enterprise Architect with AVI Systems. Same question for you, a little bit about your background, what brought you to AVI Systems, what brought you to the place where today you're being honored by your peers and colleagues as being an influencer?
Yeah, sure. So my path actually has a lot of similarities to Kate. So as a high schooler, I very loved technology, loved how things worked, loved audio visual, and went to college for video broadcast production. And so out of college, I got a job as a producer. But in that role, I ended up find myself more passionate about things I saw as like maybe inefficiencies or poor user experience or duplicate data or just inefficient ways of doing things, and found myself more in a engineering track than a production track. And so at that time, it was a lot around the analog to digital transition, manual to automation. So I ended up moving into a broadcast engineering role and served as a chief engineer of a TV station for 9 years. And during that time, did a lot of custom programming to really impact the user experience of our production teams, of our master control teams, and really was more passionate about that user experience. Through some personal things and needed to make a move back to be closer to family. So was looking for a job out to where I was looking to move, and started doing some cold calling, came across AVI Systems and put my name in, and ended up getting a job as an engineer. And I still remember starting and coming out of a broadcast engineering role. It was all SDI, there was no HDMI, there was no HDCP, there was all these things that you didn't have to think about. And so I get hired as an engineer, and my first day, someone says something about a DSP, and I'm like, "What's a DSP?" And they're like, "You got hired as an engineer, you don't know what a DSP is?" So it was a real quick drink from a fire hose to take what I knew in broadcast and move it to AV. But really, it was still about that passion about solving user problems, right? It was about how to make user impact, how to make human impact, understanding where you fit in this bigger cog of a wheel to solve these customer problems, create that experience. And just like Kate was saying, it's about making the magic happen around what does a user want to do, and make everything respond to them, right? And that's what we're passionate about is human impact. And so now, moving from that engineering role into enterprise architect, that's what I get to work with enterprise customers to really help develop that whole strategy to say, how do we impact user experience, help with their IT needs, their service needs, and really just this cohesive strategy, and really develop that with them. So that's what I'm doing now, and I'm loving it.
Well, I just want to underscore and emphasize that human aspect you talked about. I mean, really, I think our trade is all about the experiences we create, the human lives we touch, whether we're making people be able to work more easily, be more effective in their teams, learn better. It is all centered on the human experience, isn't it? I mean, for a long time, and I've been in the industry since 2004, things had been to some extent very spec sheet focused and focusing on, the speeds and feeds, as they say. But now we really do seem to have kind of elevated our consciousness about serving the client and their experience and their will and their desire first. And then the technology just feeds into that. So it's refreshing to hear so many people talk about that mindset shift. Let's move to you next, Kaylie. I'd like to know a little bit about your experience as Senior Manager of Public Relations with Crestron Electronics, how you rose to that role, and what, again, continues to ignite your passion to be a leading member of the commercial AV industry and part of the 40 under 40.
Sure. So Crestron has been my home for the past 4 years. I actually started as an intern and have been able to kind of move up through the public relations team. I really enjoy being able to work on different thought leadership pieces with our spokespeople internally, and also work with our customers and dealers to really highlight those stories. I mean, Kate and Eric have talked about it as well, that emphasis on the experience that we're able to provide. That's really what we look to do with our case studies, is highlighting those projects and the experience that they're able to kind of enjoy in those spaces. So that's one thing I really just enjoy most about the job, is focusing on those experiences and highlighting those stories. I'm able to do it on both the commercial and the residential side, which I really enjoy. We also work on our awards program internally as well, highlighting our great solutions and everything that our engineering team's able to pull together.
Very, very cool. And yeah, I just had visited Crestron a month or so ago, and I believe the internship program is one of the most impressive that I've seen. And I know that was something that you actually had been part of, and I think you are a testament to some extent of the strength of that program, and also the value of internship programs in general to cultivate and seed the next generation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been great to see it grow. Not only was I able to be converted to full-time, but one of our interns that we had on our team last year, we just recently converted to full-time as well. And so it's really cool where her and I are able to work together on a team, both being experienced members of the program and now kind of jumping in headfirst to the industry.
So let's move on, last but certainly not least, to you, Annie Foster, Associate Director of Classroom Technologies, Washington and Lee University. So you're in a little bit of a different category because you work for an end user organization, you work for a university. Tell me about what, the career path that you've taken, what has brought you to this Associate Director role, and also, what inspires you every day and makes you want to be part of the technology community, the technology industry.
Thanks. Yeah, so I started pretty similar to a lot of people in high school with a flair for the technology. I started out in technical theater and then went to college, dropped out of college for a little while, went back to college, majored in film, and then got a in-house AV position at they call themselves a higher ed institution, but they're really just a museum in Philadelphia, the Barnes Foundation. And that's where I really fell in love with AV and realized what kind of industry it could be and just the ins and outs of everything AV, and realized that like it was everything that I liked about technical theater, it was everything that I liked about IT, all rolled into one. I did rental and staging for a little bit. I kind of bounced around a lot. And then I moved back to higher ed AV and recently moved to my position at Washington and Lee in Virginia. And it's been a position that was filled with growth. Like I started here as a classroom associate and then became the associate director. And so what inspires me to do my job is kind of what everybody else is saying. Like, I like to make people's lives easier. I like to see the technology enhance the teaching and complement the teaching. I know that the technology is not the reason that people are here, but it should make their jobs and lives easier.
It absolutely should. So I thank you, everyone, one and all, for giving us some background, kind of situating us in this conversation so that we move into the more analytical phase. We know where each of you is coming from. So the first thing I'd like to ask is, and I don't want to be too, navel gazing, focusing on the 40 under 40 per se, but there has been some debate about things like the 40 under 40. Are we leaving out people who are over 40? Are we leaving out people who are over 50? Is there value in recognizing young professionals as such? And I'd like your collective opinion about the idea of, whether it's trade organizations, media outlets, spotlighting people in their 20s, people in their 30s who have already made an impact, like all of you have, who have already made names for yourself, like all of you have. Is there value in doing that? Or should we just, say, well, this is a list of influencers and some could be 25 and some could be 65. What is your assessment of spotlighting young talent?
Yeah, I can go first or jump in just a thought. So as I think about it, I think, coming in, like I mentioned, I came from broadcast to AV, and coming in and kind of hearing this wealth of knowledge that people had already in the AV industry, who had been in the industry 10, 15 plus years, right? And it's really easy to feel, overwhelmed or unqualified. So when you start to see, recognition of the younger generation and say, okay, well, there has been maybe a quick turnaround or migration or quicker impact being made in our industry by other individuals, it can be inspiring to those coming in to say, hey, I'm just starting out, but I can still make an impact. I can still grow, change, or have this impact within my organization and with the industry as a whole.
Anybody else have thoughts?
Sure. I'd say coming from kind of someone that was in an internship position and just learning about AV from that way, I think lists like this kind of help you see more of your peers, and especially on the college level. If you're able to see someone interned with a certain organization, you might be exposed to them where you hadn't been otherwise. So I think there's definitely some value in these lists highlighting younger talent to help us grow as an industry and grab some of those entry-level job positions and talent there. Definitely is a balance too, though, of our industry has tons of people that have been around for years and years, and they've got a wealth of knowledge and experience to share as well. So I think balancing the two is a great one. But I definitely think lists like this help us with exposure to those younger talents as well.
Yeah, just to kind of say what, tag on to that. I mean, I think it really helps with just the representation, right? Like if people see that somebody else like them is doing these things, getting recognized for this, then they see a place for themselves in the industry. Whereas if, you're going just off of overall impact or whatever, if you've been in the industry longer, you might have more impact, right? So it might tend to then be that older generation kind of predominating those lists, I guess. Whereas having at least, this one like this, where it's like, okay, these are the people that we're trying to get into the industry. Like you can see yourself having that impact. And then it's kind of, it's inspiring, for me personally, like I was like, I really want to be on that list one day, right? And then now that I've made it, I'm like, well, I better keep it up, right? I better keep going. So that's just the kind of things that, the kind of feeling that I have about it.
Yeah, and coming from higher ed, where I work with students a lot of the students are always looking towards the IT industry. And so I think something like this is really helpful for me to like validate going into AV, right? I've always had student employees, but they always think they'll make more money or they'll have more success going into IT. And so I think we lose a lot of people who are interested in the AV industry, but think that that's going to be a more glamorous position long term. And so a list like this helps to say, no, look, like you can succeed, you can have a fruitful career.
I think that really is an important point. And, when I think back to my high school years or my college years, and, it's sometimes hard to step into that consciousness. I'm about 20 years removed from that. But I think if I saw a list of people and they were 48 or 50 and it was celebrating their accomplishments, I think my mind's eye in that moment would think, well, that's like my mother, that's like my father. I can't really see myself in those people. They're an entirely different generation. Whereas if I see someone who's 25 or 26 or 27, I think, they're not so far removed from me. They might like the same music that I do. They might watch some of the shows that I do. I can see myself in them and I can see a path for myself through them. So that's one of the arguments that I would have made, and that I did make when people were talking about the 40 under 40, that you want to make sure that these young people, whether they're in high school, a trade school, college, whatever it is, they see themselves in the honorees so they can see a path for themselves through the honorees. Do you agree with that?
Yep.
Yeah.
So let's actually kind of segue comfortably to that idea of cultivating the next generation. All four of you and all 40 of the 40 influencers under 40 are obviously leading members of the industry, very well known, well respected within your organization and within the trade generally. How can we bring more people like you into our industry to kind of seed the next generation? We want to do this intentionally, not have people kind of fall into AV like has happened for so many years. Do you have any suggestions for how to attract people, again, just like you, whether it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? What would have enticed you into our industry, and how can we replicate that now in 2022 and 2023 and beyond?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just awareness. Like I had no idea the AV industry even existed. I had no idea there was such a thing as a control system when I was in high school. When I was in college, I mean, it was around me, but I wasn't using it, so I didn't know it was even there. It was a thing, and it wasn't until, like I said, I was kind of drafted into helping the AV department one summer, and I was like, this is amazing. I never knew this was here. I never knew this was a career possibility for me. I think it's kind of hard for us to have that kind of spread that kind of awareness. I mean, it's not something that people have typically been aware of in their own lives, especially, we like to say if we do it right, people don't notice what we do, right? Most of the time, it feels natural to them, so they don't even think about it. But I think that's starting to change, especially now that, everybody's been on Zoom and Teams and whatever for the past 2 years now. We have that branch, so we can start talking to people because they have some understanding of what we do, and we can start pointing that out and being like, oh yeah, you've been on that Zoom call, and wasn't the audio terrible, or whatever, because you were on your cell phone, and you know what would be really awesome? The kind of things that we're doing, you should take a look at this. Do you really like making things work? Do you like, Twitch streamers and stuff like that, starting to kind of branch out onto that and say like, hey, that's the kind of things that we do. You should come take a look at it.
Absolutely.
I think another industry trend that we're seeing change, and Annie kind of hit on it when she mentioned something about hitting on her passions for video and IT, right? It's the idea of IT is AV, right? So now we start talking about how can we get some of these more IT mindseted or IT centric and people into the industry as well, and start to advance that AV component to the next level, because that is where AV is going, is IT. So I think alignment with that, and we start to see that shift in enterprise organizations, where now all of a sudden IT people who came up through server and all these real IT core elements are now having to say, well, what is AV? And now we're starting to almost bridge back that other way. So there's another industry trend that would help align with that, at the education level from an IT standpoint.
Well, and honestly, the whole industry needs to advocate for itself to be paid more similarly to IT. I think that was the biggest hurdle for me, trying to convince the students I was working with that going into AV could be a career that their parents would value, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I certainly agree, not only with that, but also with what you said, Eric, in terms of the overall trend of, convergence is a deeply overused word at this point, but the blurring of the lines between trades and the fact that the technologies are intermingling now more than ever before. And you're seeing IT involvement with AV and vice versa. Maybe that will help to some extent with the pipeline, because I think there's a lot of pipeline for people who want to embrace an IT career, much less for people who say, I want to embrace a commercial AV career, if there are any of those people who are high schoolers who say that. So perhaps the commingling will bring more people into our ecosystem, even if by accident. But any thoughts from you, Kaylie, about that? The idea of enticing people to come into our industry intentionally?
Yeah, I think we all kind of hit on it a little bit in our intros, as well as that focus on that experience that we're all providing. That's the easiest thing for people to grasp, is really that end result that technology is able to provide. And I think just continuing to emphasize that and making waves with those stories really helps bring awareness to what the technology is able to power, and then pull some people into the interest of AV and IT.
So for this next question, I don't want to, personalize it too much, but we've been hearing a lot about things like the Great Resignation over the last year or so. People who are highly talented, people like yourselves, are obviously in demand. So I'm wondering what organizations can do generally to hang on to their young talent like yourselves. What can managers, CEOs, C-suite executives do to make your organizations enticing enough that you're going to stay there for the long term? What can they do to hang on to people like you? Because I think for every one of the 40 under 40, your bosses and your CEOs are going to want to hang on to people like you.
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind for me is, I guess, opportunities to innovate, right? That's key for people, and new challenges, right? I mean, every one of us talked about different career paths that have come, and all of those have been met with new challenges. So it can be really tempting when you're looking at, as a business leader, to look at the bottom line and say, this person's being very efficient in their job right now. If I move them on, I'm going to lose that efficiency, right? But new challenges and new opportunities are what are going to keep those people engaged and advanced. And I think also showing each individual what they contribute to the team, because everything's a team environment. So understanding how, as a service tech, what their impact is to that customer, to that whole customer relationship, to the ability for their business to operate, and from every aspect of it, what is their cog in the wheel, and how does that impact that relationship? And really expressing the value of each individual, I think, is very important as well.
100%. I couldn't agree more. Anyone else with thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that opportunity to grow and being able to take on new challenges, being able to kind of carve your own path as well. It's one thing I've really enjoyed about my time at Crestron so far, is being able to take on new projects, come up with new ideas and explore kind of avenues we haven't before. And really that creativity really lets me continue on that path and interested and wanting to stay here.
So
Yeah,
a through line, I was just going to say a through line so far is clearly young talent like yourselves have an aversion to stagnancy, have an aversion to complacency, have an aversion to feeling like you're sitting in the same place and not going anywhere. So clearly that is a big takeaway so far, but I'm sorry for interrupting. Please continue.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I think it's cultivating that culture within your company of, you know, people are valued and their creativity is valued, their innovation, their chance to grow in their own, you know, career and life, and making those opportunities available, because that's you know what passionate people find interesting. You know, people aren't passionate about sitting in one spot doing the same thing, you know, for 30 years or whatever. You know, it's that continual evolution and something new and solving new problems that really gets people engaged and want to stay.
So let me ask you this to kind of button up the conversation. As far as 40 under 40 influencer nominees, we had well over 100. So the 40 that we selected, it was very, very hard to pin down. I know a lot of people are kind of thinking to themselves, whether they were nominees or they may be nominees in the future, what can I do to increase my stock value essentially in my organization? What can I do to stand out? What can I do to make my peers and colleagues recognize me the way that all of you and all the other 40 under 40 have been recognized? Do you have ways that are not self-serving, but rather that are company serving and self-affirming that you feel like you embody or that you could articulate? Ways for people to stand out, but stand out not in a showy way, to stand out in a way that really benefits your organization.
I feel like for me, it was just finding the things that I felt passionate about and just sharing it. I think there's a lot of people who just, you know, they keep that to themselves, and then, you know, nobody will know that you're passionate, that you have these ideas, that you want to innovate, but finding a platform to share and pushing those ideas out there. For me, I was, you know, AV Twitter, get on there and start talking to people and sharing ideas and putting yourself out there a little bit.
Yeah, similarly for me, it was getting involved in a community, especially at the college that I was at. It was a small place, and so I called myself a department of one. And so I wanted to get involved. I wanted to know what other people were doing and talk to them and build those relationships. And really, the whole reason behind that was because I wanted to be installing the best classrooms, right? I wanted the people to have the best experience that they possibly could. And so I was trying to learn from my peers' experience and take the information from them. And that's how I got involved with HETMA, which I think is probably why I was nominated.
Yeah, I think networking is definitely a huge part of it. I'm so fortunate to be able to learn from not only our marketing and engineering teams here at Crestron, but through some of my conversations with our end users and our dealers and different publications as well, and just kind of being a sponge and being able to take that all in. There's so much to learn every day, and everyone has a wealth of knowledge, and just being able to learn from them and then have that reflected in what I do in my day-to-day as well, I think has been a huge help.
I would, I think from my standpoint, there's a lot of value in recognizing, in a humble standpoint, recognizing what you know that someone else might not know on the team that can make them successful. So like, what knowledge do I have that I can pass on to somebody else? Maybe as an engineer, here's an obstacle as an installer you're going to run into, and kind of prep them ahead of time or seek that input from the team. So really it's about not how do I make myself successful, but how do I make the whole team successful? Like where can I look out for other obstacles? Or from a customer standpoint, hey, by the way, you're going to run into this network problem, so let's start working on that now because it's going to be an issue. Whereas if I had that information and just sat on it, you know, I could, but it's not going to make anyone successful. So it's recognizing how I can make other people on my team or on other teams successful, which then make you a valuable employee, I guess, right? Because they're looking for your input to help solve problems.
Completely so. Well, I want to thank all of you for being here. And even more importantly, and I said this last week, it sounded presumptuous then, it still sounds presumptuous now, but I'm going to say it anyway. On behalf of the AV industry, I want to thank all of you and the rest of the 40 under 40 for the contributions you make to our craft and trade, for providing inspiration to people who are part of your generation and part of the next generation, and for being kind of the thought leaders that are driving us in an exciting new direction. So I think you serve the industry well. It's the honor of Commercial Integrator and the AV Plus podcast to be able to spotlight your insights and your wisdom. So thank you for all your contributions, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
So happy to have been joined by Eric Jingst, who is Enterprise Architect with AVI Systems, Annie Foster, who is Associate Director of Classroom Technologies with Washington and Lee University, Kate Adkins, who is UX Engineering Manager with Root Integrated Systems, and Kaylie Shaffer, who is Senior Manager of Public Relations with Crestron Electronics. My name is Dan Ferrisi, Editor-in-Chief with Commercial Integrator. Please check back on commercialintegrator.com each and every Friday for another edition of the AV Plus podcast. We'll be doing a series about the 40 influencers under 40 for the next several weeks until we include just about everyone who is on the list. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.